Somewhere right now, someone is standing in a garage looking at a car they've been meaning to get rid of for years. They bought it because nobody else wanted it. It was too weird, too slow to sell, too embarrassing to be seen driving off a factory lot. For decades it sat at the bottom of every price guide, the punchline in every car magazine. They have no idea it's about to be the smartest financial decision they never meant to make. This happens more often than the collector world likes to admit. The cars that get mocked when they're new are frequently the same cars that get fought over at auction 30 years later. Dealers couldn't give them away. Buyers avoided them. Magazines wrote them off as failures. And then, quietly, the supply disappeared. The ones that survived became something else entirely. Today we're going through 10 cars that were rejected, ridiculed, or ignored when they launched. Cars that lost money for the people who built them and lost value for the first owners who bought them. Every one of them is now worth more than anyone in the 1980s or 90s could have imagined. One of them might be sitting closer to you than you think. General Motors did not want anyone talking about the Pontiac Fiero. By the mid-1980s, reports of engine fires had started following the car everywhere it went. Owners were nervous. Dealers were embarrassed. The press had a field day, and GM eventually issued a recall that painted the entire Fiero lineup with the same brush, fair or not. What almost nobody noticed at the time was that Pontiac had spent its final year fixing nearly everything wrong with the car and building something genuinely serious underneath that reputation. The 1988 Fiero GT arrived with a stiffer suspension, sharper steering, and a chassis that finally matched the mid-engine layout Pontiac had been promising since day one. It was too late. The damage to the badge was already done, and Pontiac killed the Fiero that same year. Buyers walked away. Values collapsed into bargain bin territory for the next 2 decades. Ford had a different problem with the original Bronco. It wasn't scandal, it was indifference. Next to full-size trucks and flashier muscle cars rolling out of Detroit in 1966, a small, boxy off-roader looked like an afterthought, something for ranch hands and hunters, not collectors. Nobody at Ford treated it as a future icon. Nobody at the dealership treated it as anything special either. Historical records show both cars spent the better part of 30 years as afterthoughts, the kind of vehicles serious buyers actively avoided. Then something shifted. Early Broncos started disappearing from driveways and reappearing fully restored at 6-figure auction results, priced specifically for that raw, unrefined first-generation simplicity collectors now can't get enough of. The final year Fiero GT, the one nobody wanted in 1988, became the version specialists quietly search for today, precisely because so few survived Pontiac's death spiral intact. Which of these two would you have bought new, if you knew what was coming? Somebody sold a clean early Bronco for scrap money in the 1990s. Somebody else let a rust-free 88 GT go for a few $100s because nobody wants a Fiero. Both of those people found out years later exactly what they'd walked away from. And both of those stories are nothing compared to what happened to the man who built the next car on this list. He didn't just lose money on it. He lost his entire company. John DeLorean was arrested in a hotel room with 60 pounds of cocaine on a table in front of him, and by the time federal agents left, his car company was already finished. The DMC-12 never had a real chance to prove itself. It launched in 1981 with a body that looked like nothing else on the road, brushed stainless steel panels, and gull-wing doors that turned heads in showrooms. Underneath that striking shell sat a car that was genuinely underpowered, expensive to build, and plagued with quality problems from the factory floor. Reviewers were unimpressed. Sales were sluggish from the start. Then came the scandal. DeLorean's arrest in 1982, staged as part of an FBI sting, destroyed what little momentum the company had left. The Belfast factory shut down. Production ended after barely 2 years. Roughly 9,000 cars had been built, and for a while it looked like the DMC-12 would be remembered only as an expensive failure and a punchline attached to a criminal case. What most people miss is how close the entire design came to disappearing into obscurity completely. Unsold inventory sat in warehouses. Dealers who'd taken on the DeLorean brand were left holding cars nobody wanted to buy at any price. Then a director named Robert Zemeckis needed a time machine for a movie, and everything changed. Back to the Future didn't just save the DeLorean's reputation. It rewrote it. A car that couldn't sell in showrooms became one of the most recognized vehicles in film history, And the surviving 6,500 or so examples suddenly had a story no other car on this list can claim. Auction results reveal clean, unmodified DMC-12s now regularly clear six figures, a number that would have sounded insane to the dealers trying to unload them for a fraction of that in the mid-1980s. Someone out there sold a rust-free DeLorean in the 1990s for less than the price of a used Honda, convinced it was a dead brand with no future. That person watched from a distance as the car became a cultural icon worth more than they ever imagined. Not every overlooked car needed a movie to save it, though. Some of them had brilliant engineering hiding in plain sight the entire time, and almost nobody bothered to look. Subaru's engineers built something almost nobody asked for, and the market punished them for it immediately. The SVX arrived in 1991 wrapped in a strange aircraft-inspired window design, half-window doors that looked more like a concept car than anything meant for a dealership lot. Buyers didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't a sports car exactly, wasn't a luxury cruiser exactly, and that ambiguity killed it commercially before it ever had a chance. Underneath the confusing styling sat a genuinely advanced flat-six engine and full-time all-wheel drive, technology Subaru wouldn't fully capitalize on again for another decade. Sales were so weak that Subaru quietly ended production in 1996, and for years the SVX sat near the bottom of every used car guide, a car specialists now describe as a decade ahead of a market that wasn't ready for it. Mercedes-Benz had the opposite problem with the 190e February 3rd, 16 Cosworth. It wasn't misunderstood, it was underestimated. Built originally to homologate a race car for European touring competition, the 190e Cosworth carried genuine motorsport DNA under a body that looked, to most buyers, like just another compact Mercedes sedan. It didn't shout. It didn't posture. Next to flashier performance cars of the mid-1980s, it looked almost boring, and boring doesn't sell at a premium. What collectors discovered decades later is that both cars had been quietly over-engineered for markets that never showed up. The Cosworth's race-bred chassis and the SVX's aircraft canopy engineering weren't gimmicks. They were serious automotive achievements buried under styling and marketing nobody understood at the time. Which of these two would you rather have parked in your garage right now? The Subaru nobody could categorize, or the Mercedes nobody noticed? The regret stories here follow the same pattern as everything else on this list. Early SVX owners traded them in for pennies on the dollar the moment resale values cratered. Clean 190e Cosworth sat on dealer lots well into the 1990s, discounted repeatedly because nobody wanted to pay a premium for what looked like an ordinary sedan. Today, both command serious money from buyers who understand exactly what was hiding under that unassuming exterior. But even those two weren't rejected by the very brand that built them. The next car on this list was created specifically to replace an icon, and the market's response nearly ended the icon's own successor instead. Porsche built the 928 to kill its own most famous car, and the market refused to let that happen. By the late 1970s, Porsche's leadership genuinely believed the 911 was reaching the end of its useful life. Rear engine layouts were considered outdated engineering, and Porsche wanted a modern replacement. Front-engined, water-cooled, more refined, more grand tour than raw sports car. The 928 launched in 1977 with real institutional weight behind it. It even won European Car of the Year, an honor no Porsche had claimed before. Loyalists hated it anyway. To 911 diehards, the 928 wasn't an evolution, it was a betrayal. It didn't sound like a Porsche, didn't drive like a Porsche, and didn't carry the silhouette that had defined the brand for 2 decades. Sales never came close to threatening the 911's position, and Porsche's attempt to retire its own icon quietly failed. The 928 stayed in production until 1995, mostly overlooked by the same enthusiast base Porsche had built its reputation on. For the next 15 years, that rejection meant one thing: cheap Porsches. Well into the 2000s, a 928 in solid condition could be bought for a fraction of what an equivalent 911 commanded, dismissed by buyers as the Porsche that wasn't really a Porsche. Then something most owners didn't see coming happened. Collectors started reassessing what the 928 actually was: a genuinely advanced V8 powered Grand Tourer built with the same obsessive engineering standards as every other Porsche, just aimed in a different direction. Values that had been flat for decades started climbing, And clean, low-mileage examples now trade for multiples of what they sold for just 10 years ago. Someone sold a mechanically sound 928 in the early 2000s for less than a used Toyota Camry, certain it would never be worth anything because it wasn't a real Porsche. That person watched the market prove them wrong from the outside. Here's what makes this pattern even stranger. While Porsche was struggling to convince buyers to accept a new kind of sports car, an entirely different manufacturer on the other side of the world was building one so good, dealers physically could not move it fast enough to matter, and buyers still didn't show up. Toyota built a car so advanced for its era that American dealers didn't know how to sell it. The fourth-generation Supra launched in 1993 carrying a twin-turbo inline-six engine that was, by most engineering assessments of the time, wildly overbuilt for what buyers expected from a Japanese sports car. Toyota had engineered the block strong enough to handle far more power than it left the factory with, a decision almost nobody outside the company understood the significance of at the time. It didn't matter. American buyers weren't interested. By the mid to late 1990s, SUVs were taking over showroom floors, and sports car sales across the entire industry were sinking. The Supra's price tag, pushing toward $40,000 for the twin-turbo trim, put it uncomfortably close to established European sports cars with far stronger brand prestige. Dealers discounted them. Some sat unsold for months. Toyota pulled the Supra from the American market entirely in 1998, a quiet death for a car that had struggled from day one to justify its price against buyers' expectations. For years afterward, used Supras were treated as expensive, unremarkable Japanese coupes, exactly the kind of car serious collectors overlooked in favor of European exotics. Then a movie franchise changed everything. The Fast and the Furious turned the Mk4 Supra into a cultural symbol almost overnight, and the modification scene that grew around that legendary 2JZ engine block cemented its reputation as one of the most tunable, over-engineered platforms ever mass-produced. Auction results reveal what happened next. Cars that struggled to sell for $25,000 in the early 2000s now regularly clear six figures, with pristine, unmodified examples pushing well beyond that. It's one of the sharpest value reversals of any car built in the last 30 years. What would you have done if you owned a Supra Twin Turbo in 1999, watching dealers practically give them away? Somebody did exactly that. Somebody traded a low-mileage Supra in on a new SUV in the late 1990s, treating it as a depreciating liability instead of the appreciating icon it would become. Even that story doesn't compare to what happened with two exotic cars that were rejected not because the market misunderstood them, but because the wealthy refused to take them seriously at all. Ferrari built a car so disliked by its own customer base that owners avoided admitting they had one. The 308 GT4 arrived in 1973 with a shape unlike anything else wearing the prancing horse badge. Bertone had designed it with sharp, angular lines instead of the flowing curves Pininfarina had made synonymous with Ferrari for decades, and longtime clients hated the departure immediately. It also broke tradition by seating 4 people instead of 2, a practical decision that traditionalists treated as a betrayal of what a Ferrari was supposed to be. For years, the GT4 was considered the ugly Ferrari, the one serious collectors skipped in favor of anything wearing a Pininfarina badge. Prices reflected that snobbery directly. Well into the 2000s, you could buy a GT4 for a fraction of what nearly any other V8 Ferrari commanded, purely because of styling opinions formed decades earlier. Honda faced a different flavor of the same prejudice with the NSX. When it launched in 1990, it delivered exotic car performance with everyday Honda reliability, developed with input from Formula One engineering knowledge Honda had built through its racing program. On paper, it should have been celebrated. In practice, wealthy exotic car buyers dismissed it outright. It wore a Honda badge, later an Acura badge in the US, and to a buyer used to Italian prestige, that badge alone disqualified it from serious consideration, regardless of what the car could actually do on a track. What collectors eventually discovered upended both reputations completely. The GT4's Bertone styling, once considered a liability, became prized specifically because it was different from every other Ferrari of its era. The NSX's engineering, once dismissed as just a Honda, turned out to be exactly what made it durable, track-capable, and genuinely exceptional decades later, Exactly the qualities serious collectors now chase. Which one surprised you more? The Ferrari nobody wanted, or the Honda nobody respected? Someone sold a clean GT4 in the 1990s for less than a new economy car, embarrassed to even call it a real Ferrari. Someone else let an early NSX go for scrap-adjacent money, treating it as a used Japanese coupe instead of the future icon it would become. Both watched their decisions age badly from a distance. Neither of those numbers comes close to what happened with the very last car on this list. It didn't just get rejected by buyers. It got rejected while sitting in the showroom, brand new, with Ferrari and Lamborghini quietly nervous the entire time. Lexus built the most expensive car in its history, and dealers still couldn't sell it. The LFA arrived in 2010 after a development process that had stretched nearly 10 years, involving a carbon fiber monocoque so advanced that Lexus reportedly had to build its own dedicated weaving looms just to produce the body panels correctly. The naturally aspirated V10 engine was tuned in partnership with Yamaha, engineered to rev so fast that Lexus needed a digital tachometer because a standard analog needle physically couldn't keep up with it. Every technical detail pointed towards something extraordinary. The buyers didn't care. At roughly $375,000, the LFA cost more than a Ferrari 458 or a Lamborghini Gallardo, and it wore a Lexus badge instead of an Italian one. To the exact buyers who could afford it, that badge carried none of the prestige weight the price demanded. Lexus had built one of the greatest driver's cars of its era and priced it directly against brands with a century of racing pedigree behind them. The math never worked in the LFA's favor. Lexus had planned to build 500 units total, and dealers struggled to move even that limited number, reportedly discounting cars just to clear remaining inventory before production ended in 2012. For years afterward, the LFA sat in an odd limbo, respected by engineers, ignored by the exotic car market that mattered most. Then something remarkable happened. As collectors began reassessing what Lexus had actually built, technical experts and specialists started describing the LFA's engineering as ahead of nearly everything else in its class at the time. Auction results reveal a value trajectory almost no modern car has matched. Cars that once needed discounting to sell now regularly trade for well over double their original sticker price, with pristine examples pushing past $1 million. Ferrari and Lamborghini, the brands buyers chose over the LFA in 2010, now watch their own dealers field calls from clients asking about a Lexus. Someone turned down an LFA at MSRP in 2011, unwilling to pay Ferrari money for a Japanese badge. That decision alone may be one of the single most expensive missed opportunities on this entire list. Which of these 10 cars would you have bet on, back when everyone else was walking away? Every car on this list shares the same origin story. Somebody rejected it. Dealers discounted it. Owners apologized for it. The market decided, collectively and confidently, that these cars weren't worth taking seriously, and the market was wrong, 10 separate times, in 10 completely different ways. That's the real lesson buried in all of this. Rejection isn't proof that something has no value. Sometimes it's the first sign that value hasn't been recognized yet. The Fiero, the Bronco, the DeLorean, the SVX, the Cosworth, the 928, the Supra, the GT4, the NSX, and the LFA all sat in the same uncomfortable position at some point. Ignored, discounted, or laughed at by buyers who couldn't see past a badge, a shape, or a bad headline. The people who held on to them anyway, sometimes by accident, sometimes out of stubbornness, ended up holding something far more valuable than they ever expected. Somewhere right now, another car is sitting in that exact position. Overlooked, discounted, waiting. Which one of these 10 would you have bet on before everyone else caught up? And more importantly, what do you think is sitting in driveways right now, being ignored the same way, right before the market finally notices?